Now we thank you for staying tuned. We'll be discussing the dangers of single-use plastics on the environment. Plastics have become an integral part of our everyday life, but their convenience comes with significant environmental cost. And joining us today on the conversation is Tolani Kadri. He is the project manager, Green Hub Africa Foundation. He will be shedding light on the implications of single-use plastics and what can be done to mitigate their impact. Thank you for joining us, Kola.
The pleasure is all mine.
All right, the Lagos State government disclosed that the enforcement on the ban of single-use plastics will commence in the next 2 weeks, and there is no going back. So on that premise, let's start from the basis. A lot of people might not even understand what single-use plastics are. So I'd like you to explain what constitutes single-use plastics and how they are considered harmful to our environment.
Thank you very much. So when we say single-use plastic in layman's, in the layman language, these are the types of plastic that once they are used, they become waste. We have the types of plastic that once we use them, they can be recycled, they can be reused, or sometimes they can also be upcycled. But there is this set of plastic that once they are used, they no longer serve any purpose. They become waste, and these are the ones we call the single-use plastic. And you have them, you have them almost in our daily lives, like the styrofoams, the straws that we use, and a number of other items that once they are used, they just simply become waste. And I must commend the Lagos State government for taking such a bold and laudable initiative, despite the myriad of market failures that have been experienced in the past when similar policies had been introduced. You would recall that sometimes in 2022, the Lagos State Environmental Protection Agency did introduce a similar policy, but due to the weak buy-in from relevant stakeholders, the policy did not really see the light of the day. So it's quite commendable that the government has taken this step despite the challenges we have at large.
So there is a problem of plastic pollution, not only in Nigeria, but
Yes.
In other climes. But for a city like Lagos, what are the observable environmental impacts?
Oh, okay, thank you. So you let me take it from this angle. Just barely 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, the entire city was buzzing for the Dirty December. Yes, and for someone in the climate space, I had a bias against that neologism, Dirty December. While I know quite all right that it was meant to describe Lagos as a new haven for entertainment, somehow it also connoted a sense of unbridled fun where people can throw caution to the wind. And it might interest people to know that a recent research carried out by the United Nations Environment Program did estimate that about 60 million sachets of water are being thrown around the streets of Lagos every day. Now, when you consider such statistics on the surface, it sounds highfalutin, but when you now then drill further, you'd realize Lagos generates over 13,000 tons of waste every day, and then you know it's not far-fetched. So such menace, if allowed to fester, can become a time bomb. And for a state like Lagos, given its economic size, the burgeoning population, and its growing tourism potentials, it's important that this step was taken. Research has also shown that microplastic gets into the bloodstream, and that's because of the rate at which plastic is being churned out every day. Single-use plastic is being churned out. We have them blocking our canals. We have them contributing immensely to the flooding challenges we have in Lagos, the rising sea levels. We also have them affecting aquatic health, the aquatic ecosystem, and often most of these aquatic the fishes we eat often have been affected by this pet. It takes roughly 1,000 years for a plastic bottle to decompose. And you can imagine once these bottles end up in our canals, get into the ocean and the lagoons, and then these fishes and other animals feed on them, on the microplastic, and then we end up eating them. So consequently, it affects not just human health, but also the health of other organisms, around us. So the step is quite laudable, and I just want to believe that the government will sustain this momentum, because there was this myriad of market failures that were responsible for the poor implementation in the past. And I want to believe those behind this current policy brief must have considered this lapses to consolidate the success ahead. But maybe when we go further, I will delve into that.
Okay, so let's talk about sustainable alternatives, because if we are saying we want to stop the use of single-use plastics, what are the sustainable alternatives that are there? And then the companies that deal with the production of plastics, are they ready for a transition?
Oh, thank you. So you just asked, I would then segue into what I wanted to say earlier. So this now then brings us into what we call the Extended Producer's Responsibility, EPR. This was a regulation introduced by the Nigerian Environmental Standards and Regulatory Enforcement Agency in 2014. Yes, NESRIA. Now, the EPR, also known as the Extended Producer's Responsibility, is a regulation that requires producers of plastic packaging to pay for the collection and the recycling infrastructure through an industry-run Producers Responsibility Organization, the PRO. Now, when this policy came to bear in 2014, the big brands, I wouldn't mention names, the big brands came together to form the first PRO, known as the Food and Beverage Recycling Alliance. Now, the Food and Beverage Recycling Alliance was the first PRO to be formed to ensure that we now have, an avenue through which these companies can pay for the recycling infrastructure. But unfortunately, the plastic regime in Lagos, in Nigeria, generally doesn't have the statutory characteristics of an organization. So as such, while it remains there, while we have over 1,000 plastic producers in Nigeria, FIBRA today is made up of less than 40 of them. So you can imagine the yawning gap we have there. And so consequently, the resources required to finance the proper collection and recycling is not commensurate with the number of plastic producers we have out there. So there is a policy, that's where the policy gap exists. And when you do not have, when the regulation is not mandatory on all plastic producers, then we would end up have what we call the split incentives, where the cost of implementation and the benefit of sustainability is not well spread across all stakeholders. So while some are paying the sacrifice to ensure that we recycle, we have a proper recycling infrastructure, there are those who are profit driven and are rather just focused on, ensuring that they keep producing and churning out the PET. So for this policy to really see the light of the day, I want to believe that those behind the policy brief have considered this negative environmental externalities to ensure that we do not have a repeat of the failure we had in 2022 when LASEPA pursued a similar policy. So it all boils down to proper coordination currently between the policy, those implementing the policy, and all the relevant parastatals in Lagos to ensure that the FIBRA is well populated by the producers and they all pay their dues to ensure we have a proper recycling infrastructure.
I'll come to recycling, but before I come to that, I want to ask, what are the roles of the informal waste pickers? What role do they play in ensuring that we address plastic waste?
Yes, so the informal waste pickers, I would rather want to consider them as being part of the private sector investors. Well, to a large extent, what they contribute might be infinitesimal, but the role they play would only be fostered. The role they play at large would be reinforced only when we have an effective plastic regime within the state. For us to have an effective plastic regime, we need to ensure that plastic producers are accountable for what they do. They need to be held accountable. They need to contribute to building the recycling infrastructure for informal waste workers to thrive efficiently. Yes, in some parts of Lagos today, We do not have, Loma do not have their tentacles spread across the nooks and cranny. And this is where you have informal waste workers coming to the fore. But for them to function effectively, for them to really have the wherewithal to function effectively, we need to ensure that the plastic producers are held accountable, or else what they do would not be felt at large. It's just going to be like a drop in the ocean trying to help a challenge that's way bigger than they can solve.
How do we hold them accountable now? What would you suggest can be done?
Yes, so for us to hold them accountable, this is where the state government needs to ensure that FIBRA as the statutory characteristics of an organization that can mandate every plastic producer to be held accountable for, because the reason why FIBRA came to fore was to ensure that we have a producer responsibility organization where all plastic packaging producers can support the collection and the recycling infrastructure. So for us to ensure that these plastic producers are held accountable, they all need to be part of FIBRA. You can imagine the gap. If you have over 1,000 plastic producers in Nigeria and you have less than 40 of them being part of FIBRA, what are we saying here?
Maybe the question should be, should there be penalty?
Yes, there should be. There was a particular time when the last administration at the federal level introduced a green tax. The green tax was to ensure that producers of plastic, of the resins, which is one of the components of plastic manufacturing, pay a particular tax for for the importation and production of plastic, and that was to ensure that they're held accountable. But for some reasons, the current administration at the federal level as well, altered that policy, possibly because due to the reforms that were being taken, and that was to ensure that it would not also discourage production. And so, there needs to be, there's a need for the government to strike a balance for them to really hold those people accountable, or else we'll just keep going around the circle. But I want to believe that for the government to have said in the next 2 weeks, there will be a total ban on single-use plastic. It therefore means that they must have taken time to trash out these lapses to consolidate the success ahead. So it's a matter of us seeing how it's going to play out for us to know whether it's going to be effective or not.
So now let's talk about recycling. It is often promoted as a solution to plastic waste.
Yes.
But reading about this, critics argue that it's not enough. And some of the points that I saw was that when you recycle some of the plastics, they reduce in quality. Some said that for stuffs like straw, they might not be able to be recycled because you have particles of food which contaminates it and all that. So can recycling solve the problem of plastic pollution? Well,
recycling would not solve it. Rather, let me say recycling is simply just part of the larger solution. What people are seeing to be the ultimate solution to curbing the plastic problem is the introduction of a circular economy, where we can keep track of the life cycle of plastic from the point of production, to the end user. And it's quite broader than just mere recycling. Recycling, of course, yes, is to ensure that we do not keep churning out pets, and we do not have this wasteful culture of just using and keep buying and keep buying. So rather, we want to say the recycling helps to ensure that people develop a culture of proper management. And this is where also information asymmetry comes to the fore. One of the major problems, one of the market failures has to do with information asymmetry, where the final consumer doesn't know the role they play when it comes to the plastic problem. And this is what we do at Green Up Africa Foundation. We've been able to ensure that we cascade the solutions not just to different demographic cohorts, from the primary schools to the secondary, and even to those within the Gen Z, the Gen X, the millennials and the millennials, right? So we have programs to ensure that they're empowered and educated about the need for them to be part of the recycling culture. So recycling, of course, is not something that we should just leave to the government or say just the parastatals. It's something you and I can do in our homes. So when I use when I use a tin of any beverage, rather than just throwing it out there, I can turn it into something else. In fact, recycling also involves what we call upcycling, to say that instead of just reusing it, you can also now then make it something even bigger than it was before. So you upcycle means that, a plastic can now become a decorative item in your house. We have ottomans being made from bottles nowadays. So this is what part of the recycling does. It's just to ensure that we have a culture of frugality. Let me put it that way.
Looking
a culture
at
of frugality.
The points that the critics have raised, what are the challenges that the recycling industry are going through?
Yeah, so the major problem with the recycling industry has to do with the lack of private sector investment. And this will now then boil down to what is the role of FIBRA in ensuring that the infrastructure is in place for recycling to thrive. For recycling to thrive, we need to ensure that plastic producers are held accountable. They need to be part of they need to be part of the extended producers' responsibility regime, where they contribute to the proper collection, aggregation, and the recycling infrastructure. And for them, once they can contribute to this regime, then private sector participation will be spurred. It's just the simple way economics work. Once you're paying your tax, the government can do its can carry out its function. So the same thing also happens to the recycling industry. For the private sector to thrive, then the plastic producer should also play their role. And that's just a simple cycle around it.
All hands must be on deck.
Exactly.
So we are still talking about the dangers of single-use plastics, and now bringing it down to the people at the grassroots. Yes. Do you believe that there is sufficient engagement and awareness going on down there? Because they are the end users, you know. So do you think that there's enough awareness, or what more can be done to engage people, especially at the grassroots?
Oh, thank you. And so back to what I said earlier, one of the market failures responsible for the poor implementation of single-use ban has to do with what I would call information asymmetry. And this is when people are not well informed about their role when it comes to managing single-use plastic. And this is where civil societies and non-governmental organizations come to the fore. It's not just something the government can do alone, but rather you need civil societies and non-governmental organizations to go to the grassroots, the markets, communities, schools, vulnerable communities, and ensure that they pass this knowledge to them, letting them know how they can become useful to the society. Recycling can be done within any cluster. At Growing Up Africa Foundation, we take recycling to schools. We take it to primary schools. We take it to secondary schools. We also have collaborations with the World Resources Institute, where we work and ensure that we teach people about recycling even at the tertiary level, and where they can also learn. So non-governmental organizations have a critical role to play when it comes to promoting the recycling culture and ensuring that people know that they are responsible. Every single thing you throw out there has an effect. And this is also where we also need a mindset shift, right?
Because I was going to ask you,
exactly.
Behavioral change.
Yeah, there's a need for a behavior because I've noticed it's more of it's something. Okay, I think it's a good thing I'm even here today because I've always been looking for an avenue to vent my spleen.
Okay.
Now there are several times I've been to the Oshodi bus terminal, and I was quite aware that terminal was built with taxpayers' money, and I sometimes feel pain when I see the gradual rot happening there. Not because the government hasn't done the right thing, but you realize that there is just this culture of negligence. So sometimes I could go to a shop owner there and say, I need to buy water. And I take my water and I ask them, please, do I have a bin around? They say, just drop it on the floor. So you just drop it there, they will sweep it later on. So you can see there is they are inured to the corrective maintenance culture and not rather the preventive. So this is where the behavioral change needs to happen. It's quite appalling, and it's not just that place alone. It's an anomaly that has permeated different sectors of the society, not just in Lagos, but definitely other parts of the country as well. So we need a proper behavioral change, and it might take.
How do we That's the word to use now.
How do we
inculcate into people?
Yeah, so of course, I think this is where the state also has a critical role to play. Sometimes I can recall, sometimes back in some 20 years ago, there was this program being heard on TV, Act for Behavioral Change Campaign, ABCC. And I can recall, this is where I learned some of the basic things I knew about, the behavioral change we need to adopt as Nigerians. And, this is where, so it's something that we need to instill in the subconscious of every Nigerian, and it could start from programs to enlighten people. And the government also needs to work with relevant stakeholders in the private sector, and also for the non-governmental organizations, to ensure that they are being able to go to those vulnerable communities where people are not that well informed. There are some parts of Lagos today where when you go there and tell them about plastic pollution, they will just laugh at you, because they tell you, we have other pressing issues than to think of plastic. And this is where, NGOs can definitely go to this nook and cranny to ensure that they pass the message there.
So what strategies would you suggest right now because you have raised salient points, It's not just placing the ban or saying you're going to enforce. There has to be a behavioral change. So what strategies can you advise that government can also implement to help people better understand why we are doing this?
Okay, so you'd recall when I was here sometimes last year, I did note that one of the things that was one of the initiatives taken by the government of the United Kingdom to when there was a ban on single-use cups was the government introduced public fountains where people can just go and get water. So when you tell a random bus conductor not to patronize single-use plastic, what's the alternative out there? And I believe this is also where the local governments should also be held accountable. Government needs to go beyond. We should stop seeing government as a thing just within the state level, but also the local government and the councillors, the wards need to also begin to play their role. I really want to feel that effect of this new reforms being introduced, whereby I can begin to feel, well, I would rather want to focus on who's my local government chairman than who's the state government chairman.
And now that they have the financial autonomy.
Exactly. So with the financial autonomy now, we need to now start seeing government as something that's within the grassroots. That is where the change can start from. Let me tell you something, and you might laugh at this. Because of my fanaticism, within the space, there are times I've actually, maybe when coming from work at night, I just stop by on the road and I'll go there at somewhere at Oshodi and begin to threaten those women, selling things on the road, telling them, listen, if you litter here, I'm going to call my boys to come and arrest you. And they begin to beg me, not knowing that I'm just a random citizen out there. But I believe this is where the local government can also begin to act and play what's expected of them. We can't just begin to leave this to say the state will do everything, and we need to ensure that government gets to the grassroots for people to really have that behavioral change being implemented.
Okay. So Nigeria as a country, how does Nigeria compare to other countries in tackling single-use plastics? Do you think we're making progress in the fight against plastic pollution? If not, how well can we do it?
Well, there have been a number of policy briefs introduced at the federal level, not just now. In the past, we've had policies being introduced, but policies, it's one thing to introduce policies, it's another thing to really have the new to address the transformational system failures associated with the policy implementation. So so there are times whereby a policy is introduced and you would still not see the evidence of policy coordination among the relevant parastatals. Let's narrow down to Lagos. So if, for instance, LASEPA introduces a policy, how well informed is LOMA in working alongside LASEPA? So you can also take that to the federal level. We've seen policies introduced by certain ministries, and then the parastatals underneath might not really get a proper brief. And this is where the disconnect, once the disconnect happens, enforcement becomes a challenge. So there was a time that I think that was in August last year, yes, the Ministry of Environment introduced the ban the ban of single-use plastic within the Ministry of Environment. I believe if it has been very effective, then definitely we should be seeing the ripple effects and the efforts taken to perhaps introduce it to other states at the state level. But I believe everything is still in motion, and so let's believe these things would take shape with time. Compared to other parts of Africa, I wouldn't say we have made much progress. We haven't yet. But I want to believe these policies are still at their early stages, and it would be better to see how things unfold with time.
So for countries who have succeeded in tackling plastic pollution, what lessons can we learn from them and also implement here?
Okay, so for instance, there is what we call the plastic packaging tax that was being introduced, I think being introduced in South Africa and Egypt, where producers and importers of plastic resins need to pay, to ensure that over time, they would now then see the need to adopt other sustainable components into their production. This is something I believe we can also introduce in Nigeria to ensure that while if FIBRA cannot even play its role fully, then the government can also now then introduce policies that would spur these organizations to do the needful. So this is something I believe we can also introduce, and also the concept around circular economy is very important. The extended producer responsibility needs to be taken not just within the plastic sector, but also for electronic waste. There is a policy currently to help curb electronic waste, which is also one of the very big problems we have in the society today. So I believe if these policies can be introduced at a broader level, not just Lagos. Of course, I know the Nigeria is always on Lagos because of its status as one of the largest economies in sub-Saharan Africa. But of course, we have 36 states of the Federation and the FCT, so there is a need to ensure that we have it spread across, the country.
So for businesses that rely heavily on single-use plastics,
yes,
what are the alternatives that they can go for?
Well,
and how affordable are these alternatives?
So the alternatives would largely depend on what I would rather call the alternatives in the long run would depend on what the producers end up coming up with. People, of course, some might say, well, after all, you can use in the past we have people who would rather use leaves instead of styrofoam. In fact,
I went to a restaurant where they wrapped their pounded yam with leaves.
But how sustainable is that as well? Because to a large extent, we also want to protect our natural reserves, the forest, and so to what alpha do you want to continue deforestation? I mean, somehow you're trying to say we want to promote deforestation because we also want to become more sustainable, and as such now, so deforestation should continue. And as we speak today, Nigeria has one of the largest rates of deforestation globally, if not the largest, if not the highest anyway. So when it comes to other means, sustainable means, well, it's not something I would rather want to give options in the short term. Rather, the sustainable means would now then depend on how are these companies being spurred to introduce sustainable components into their production. Because we can't afford to say that sustainability means that I would not then rely on nature. You rely on nature and then you are depleting natural reserves. So it would now then, require, extended producer responsibility is such that companies begin to devise other sustainable components into their production in such a way that we can now then sell to people and say, well, these are sustainable means of, these are the sustainable alternatives to the single-use plastic that we've been using. So it's not something I would just tell people, oh, go ahead, go and start using leaves.
So even the leaves is not.
No, it's not.
It's not an option.
It's not a long-term option. I don't think it is.
Interesting conversation that we've had here in the studio, talking about dangers of single-use plastics on the environment. We thank you very much, Tolani Kadri.
The pleasure is all mine.
Project Manager, DG Brands, and Green Hub Africa Foundation, for sharing your insight on this topic. The conversation continues after this. Stay with us.
The conversation. Let the conversation continue. Let the conversation continue.
All right, single-use plastics pose a significant threat to our environment and health, but with concerted efforts from individuals, corporations, and the government, we can mitigate these dangers and move towards a more sustainable future. You know, our guest said something. He said that if we begin to hold this plastic companies accountable, then it will also help in mitigating this. And he also said something when I asked him, you know, we talked about, I went to a restaurant where they packaged their pounded yam with leaves, and he said he doesn't think that's a sustainable alternative because, again, that will be promoting deforestation, which is not also nice. And so someone here in the studio was saying, so we can't use plastics, we cannot use our away again. So what then do we now use? That's a question thrown to everybody. Well, anyway, the point is the use of single-use plastics is dangerous to our health and the environment. And of course, again, the Lagos State government has said that they'll be going all out to enforce the ban on this. Abimbola.
I mean, I know that when he said, you know, the use of the leaf, it was funny. But I know that I really don't know if it is now unhealthy, because I know that that was how, you know, our moi moi used to be Momo Elewe, and you know, this was used way back. Even though I know that at the moment, most homes now use different things, you know, to make their moi
kind of Ziploc
they use now, the
reusable.
Ziploc, some use the nylon, some use plastics.
But
some use
back in the days, we used to have tin, yes.
Yes, now some use the tin that has the cover, and some use their milk tin.
Yes,
as a recycler.
Yes.
So different things. But then again, sometimes people differ on so many issues. I know that the leaf thing would still be controversial, because there's some people who still believe that the leaf is a natural, you know.
You said it as deforestation. Now we should know you.
Climate change. He said it's deforestation.
So in those days when people used to use the leaf for moi moi and pounded yam, what happened then?
But you know that leaf gives it, there's this flavor. Yeah.
Yes, I know. So again, it's debatable. So while those who are particular about the environment will say it is deforestation, the health practitioners will say it is healthy.
So what do we use in place of the leaf?
Okay.
Now that you're saying we should not use plastic.
It's
that the leaves are medicinal.
Well, I don't know. Different strokes, honestly, for different folks. But so for the single-use plastics, as dangerous as they are, I know that the Lagos State government is now more about the styrofoams, as against, you know, the disposables. Because the disposables, you can still use those ones over and over again, even though, some will also say once the oil starts staying in it, then it's no longer safe for use. But those ones you can still recycle. But the styrofoam, those ones are the danger, you know, that are just there. They don't degrade. They are just like that. So we'll continue to look for alternatives. But if we look at the R's of, you know, recycling, reuse, and what's the third? I always forget the third one: reuse, recycle, and the 3 R's.
Very low.
Yeah, I think the plastics maybe will still fall under the category, and so you can still use those ones to make your moi moi or anyone that works for you, Sha. But for me, I don't know. Do what works for you.
Just find your level.
Find your level. But be rest assured that the Lagos State government is ready, you know, to take this war. So for those who are still in the business of bringing in styrofoams, still selling styrofoams, those who use who sell food and you use styrofoam for your packaging, 2 weeks is countdown has started, and you know that when it is government war, you can't win that war.
You can't.
You can't win that war. So
no matter where you're hiding.
Yeah, so it's best you just key in. And you know, there are a lot of people now that are using the brown paper and the cartons, the white cartons to you know, oil-free, grease-free to package their meals.
Yeah.
So find your balance. Find what works for you. Any other addition?
Let's go.
That's the midweek edition of The Conversation today. Many thanks for watching the program. By God's grace, tomorrow will be another time to join the team at 10 a.m. Enjoy the rest of your day. I am Abimbola Bello.
And I am Ajibola Ojashola. Thanks for watching the show.
I am Joy Olu. Enjoy the rest of your day.